Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the marble hallways of Seal Records, one of the biggest music companies in the city. At 52 years old, she had been working as a janitor there for 8 years. Every morning at 5, she would arrive before anyone else, quietly cleaning offices, emptying trash bins, and making sure everything sparkled for the executives who would arrive hours later. The employees at Seal Records barely noticed Maria. To them, she was just part of the furniture, invisible, unimportant, someone who cleaned up their messes. They would talk loudly on their phones about million-dollar deals while she mopped around their feet. They threw papers on the floor right after she had cleaned, knowing she would pick them up. Some even made jokes about the old cleaning lady when they thought she couldn't hear them. But Maria heard everything. She understood every word, even though many people assumed she didn't speak good English. The truth was, Maria was much smarter than anyone realized. She had been a successful businesswoman in her home country before moving to America 15 years ago. Back then, she owned 3 restaurants and employed over 40 people. But when she came to America, her business degree meant nothing. Her English wasn't perfect, and she needed work immediately to support her 2 children. So Maria took the janitor job, telling herself it was temporary. She would clean during the day and study at night, planning to build something better. But life got in the way. Her daughter needed medical care, her son wanted to go to college, and the bills kept coming. The temporary job became permanent, and her dreams seemed to fade away. Every day as Maria cleaned the offices of music executives, she watched how they worked. She saw them make decisions about which songs to promote, which artists to sign, and how to market albums. She noticed their mistakes too, how they often ignored talented musicians because they didn't fit the typical image, or how they spent huge amounts of money on artists who never became successful. During her lunch breaks, Maria would sit in the company cafeteria and listen to music on her old phone. She had always loved music, and she had a natural ear for what sounded good. Over the years, she started recognizing patterns in hit songs. She could often predict which new releases would succeed and which ones would flop, just by listening to them once. Maria also noticed something else during her years at Seal Records. The company was starting to struggle. The executives made big salaries and drove expensive cars, but the actual business wasn't doing well. They were losing money on bad investments and failing to discover new talent. Many of their biggest stars had left for other companies, taking their profits with them. The CEO of Seal Records was a man named Richard Blake, who treated Maria particularly badly. He would snap his fingers at her when he wanted something cleaned, never bothering to learn her name. He called her the help, and once threw a coffee cup on the floor just to watch her clean it up. Blake thought he was untouchable because his family had money and connections in the music industry. Other employees followed Blake's example. The marketing director would leave rotting food in her office trash can for days, knowing Maria would have to deal with the smell. The talent scouts would laugh about how the dumb janitor probably thought their job was easy. They had no idea that Maria was actually paying attention to everything they did, learning their business from the ground up. But Maria was learning every single day. She memorized the names of music industry contacts, overheard phone conversations about deals, and even started understanding the complex contracts that were left on desks. When executives threw away papers, she would sometimes glance at them while emptying the trash, picking up valuable information about the industry. At night, after her long shifts, Maria would go home to her small apartment and research the music business online. She studied successful record labels, learned about digital marketing, and followed industry trends. Her children, now grown up, didn't understand why their mother was spending so much time on the computer. They worried she was working too hard and suggested she find an easier job. But Maria had a plan forming in her mind. She had been invisible for 8 years, watching and learning. She knew the music industry better than many of the executives who looked down on her. She understood what Seal Records was doing wrong, and she had ideas about how to do it better. The question was whether she would ever get the chance to prove it. As Maria finished cleaning the executive floor one evening, she overheard Blake on a phone call in his office. He was angry, shouting at someone about falling profits and threatening to fire people if things didn't improve. Through the glass wall, she could see financial reports spread across his desk, all showing red numbers. Seal Records was in serious trouble, though Blake was trying to hide it from most employees. Maria quietly finished her work and prepared to leave. But something had changed in her mind that night. She was tired of being treated like she was worthless. She was tired of watching incompetent people make bad decisions while she stayed silent. For the first time in years, Maria started thinking seriously about what would happen if she stopped being invisible and started being seen. The next morning, Maria arrived at Seal Records with a different feeling in her chest. She had barely slept, her mind racing with ideas she had been collecting for years. As she cleaned the offices, she paid even closer attention to the conversations and documents around her. Today felt like the beginning of something important. Around 10 in the morning, she overheard a heated discussion in the main conference room. Blake and his senior staff were arguing about their latest album release, which had completely flopped. They had spent $2 million promoting an artist who sold only a few thousand copies. The marketing director was blaming the talent scouts were blaming the marketing team, and Blake was shouting at everyone. Maria continued, mopping the hallway outside the conference room, but she was listening carefully. She knew exactly why that album had failed. She had heard the songs weeks ago when the artist was recording, and she could tell immediately they weren't good enough. The melodies were boring, the lyrics were meaningless, and the artist had no real passion. But none of the executives had asked for her opinion, obviously. During her lunch break, Maria sat in the cafeteria and opened her laptop. Over the years, she had been quietly building something that nobody knew about. She had created social media accounts where she reviewed new music releases and predicted which ones would become hits. Her followers didn't know she was a janitor at a record company. They just knew her as Music Maria and trusted her opinions because she was almost always right. What started as a hobby had grown into something bigger. Maria now had over 50,000 followers across different platforms. Music bloggers and industry websites had started noticing her predictions. Some radio DJs even mentioned her reviews on their shows. But she had kept this completely separate from her work life, afraid that people at Seal Records would make fun of her if they found out. That afternoon, something happened that changed everything. A young musician named Jake Morrison came to Seal Records for an audition. He was 22 years old, nervous, and carrying an old guitar. Maria saw him sitting in the lobby waiting for his appointment, and something about his music caught her attention immediately. Jake was quietly practicing his song, not realizing that Maria could hear him from the hallway. The melody was beautiful, his voice was genuine, and the lyrics told a real story about growing up poor and dreaming of something better. Maria stopped cleaning and just listened. This was exactly the kind of authentic talent that Seal Records needed, but she knew they would probably reject him because he didn't look like their typical polished artists. Sure enough, after Jake's audition, Maria heard the executives laughing about him in the conference room. Blake called him just another wannabe with a guitar and said his music was too real for their audience. They wanted someone who looked good in music videos, not someone who actually had something to say. Jake left the building looking crushed, carrying his guitar case and walking slowly toward the bus stop. Maria made a decision that surprised even herself. She finished her shift quickly, then hurried outside to catch Jake before his bus arrived. When she approached him, he looked confused. He had no idea who this cleaning lady was or why she was talking to him. "Your music is very good," Maria told him in her accented English. "Don't let them make you feel bad. They don't know what they're doing." Jake smiled sadly. "Thanks, but I think they made it pretty clear that I'm not what they're looking for." "Maybe that's a good thing," Maria said. "Maybe you need different kind of company." That evening, Maria went home and did something she had never done before. She used her Music Maria accounts to post a video of herself talking about the music industry. She didn't show her face, but she talked about how big record companies were making terrible decisions and missing great talent because they only cared about looks and trends, not actual music. The video went viral overnight. Thousands of people shared their own stories about being rejected by record companies, or about loving artists who never got proper promotion. Music industry professionals started commenting, agreeing that the big labels were out of touch with what audiences actually wanted to hear. But Maria wasn't done. She reached out to Jake through social media and offered to help him record a professional demo. She had saved money over the years, and she decided to invest some of it in his music. They found a small recording studio, and Jake recorded 3 songs with better production quality than his original demos. Maria then used her social media influence to promote Jake's music. She created a hashtag campaign and encouraged her followers to share his songs. Within a week, Jake's music had been heard by hundreds of thousands of people. Radio stations started playing his songs, and other musicians began reaching out to collaborate with him. The most amazing part was watching the response online. People were hungry for authentic music that told real stories, exactly the opposite of what Seal Records was producing. Comments poured in from listeners who said Jake's songs made them feel understood, that his lyrics spoke to their own experiences of struggling and hoping for better things. Meanwhile, at Seal Records, the executives were starting to notice the buzz around Jake Morrison. Blake was furious when he realized this was the same musician they had rejected just weeks earlier. He demanded to know how Jake had gotten professional recording and marketing support, but nobody could figure out where the campaign was coming from. The marketing director spent hours trying to identify who was behind the music Maria, accounts that were promoting Jake. They could see that these accounts had significant influence in the music industry, but they couldn't connect them to any known music executives or PR companies. It was like the campaign was being run by a ghost. Maria continued her regular work routine, cleaning the offices and listening to conversations. But now she felt completely different. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was actively changing the music industry, just not in a way anyone at Seal Records could see. Every day she watched the executives get more frustrated as Jake's success grew, while their own artists continued to fail. By the end of the month, Jake Morrison had signed with a different record label, a smaller company that appreciated his talent and gave him creative control over his music. His first official single reached the top 10 on several charts, and music critics were calling him the most promising new artist of the year. Blake was so angry about missing out on Jake that he fired 2 people from the talent scouting team. But Maria knew this was just the beginning. She had proven to herself that she understood the music business better than the people who had been treating her like she was worthless. Now she was ready to take the next step in her plan. Maria's success with Jake Morrison gave her confidence, but she knew one artist wasn't enough to prove her point. Over the next few months, she continued working at Seal Records during the day while secretly building her music empire at night. Her Music Maria brand was becoming more powerful, and industry insiders were starting to take notice of her predictions and recommendations. The irony wasn't lost on Maria. During the day, executives at Seal Records would dismiss her as just a cleaning lady, but at night some of those same executives were probably reading her music reviews online, not knowing they were getting advice from the woman they treated so poorly. Maria started identifying more rejected artists, musicians who had been turned away by major labels for being too different or not commercial enough. She reached out to them through her social media accounts, offering guidance and sometimes financial support for recording demos. Her apartment became an unofficial headquarters for what she called real music, songs that told authentic stories, instead of following corporate formulas. One of her discoveries was a teenage girl named Zoe Chen, whose parents had brought her to audition at Seal Records. Zoe wrote her own songs about dealing with anxiety and feeling like an outsider at school. Her lyrics were honest and powerful, exactly what young people needed to hear. But Blake and his team rejected her immediately, saying her music was too depressing, and that teenagers wanted fun, upbeat songs instead. Maria knew they were completely wrong. She had been watching social media trends, and she could see that young people were actually desperate for music that acknowledged their real struggles. Mental health, social pressure, family problems, these were the topics that resonated with teenagers, not the shallow party songs that record companies kept producing. So Maria reached out to Zoe and her parents. She offered to help produce a professional recording of Zoe's best song, Not Okay, which was about learning to accept that it's normal to struggle sometimes. Maria invested her own savings to hire a good recording studio and experienced musicians to create a full arrangement of the song. When Not Okay was released online, the response was incredible. Within days, teenagers all over the world were sharing the song and talking about how it perfectly expressed feelings they couldn't put into words. The song went viral on multiple platforms, and Zoe became an overnight sensation. Mental health. Organizations started using her music in their campaigns, and schools invited her to speak about her experiences. Back at Seal Records, Blake was having another crisis meeting. Two of their biggest artists had just left the company, taking their contracts to competitors. Meanwhile, artists they had rejected were becoming successful with other labels or as independent musicians. The company's stock price was falling, and board members were asking difficult questions about Blake's leadership. Maria cleaned the conference room after one of these crisis meetings, and she saw the financial reports they had left behind. Seal Records was in worse shape than she had realized. They were losing money on almost every new artist they signed, while spending huge amounts on marketing campaigns that didn't work. Their total debt was growing every month, and they were running out of cash to keep operating. But Maria also noticed something else in those reports. Seal Records owned the rights to thousands of old songs from previous decades. These song rights were actually valuable, but the current management wasn't doing anything smart with them. Maria realized that if someone knew how to properly use those music rights, they could be worth millions of dollars. That gave Maria an idea that was bigger and bolder than anything she had tried before. Instead of just helping individual artists, what if she started her own record company? She had been learning the business for 8 years. She understood what audiences wanted, and she had already proven she could identify and develop successful musicians. Maria began researching how to start a record label. She studied business registration, music licensing, distribution deals, and all the legal requirements. It was complicated, but she had dealt with complex business regulations before when she owned restaurants. The skills were similar, just applied to a different industry. The biggest challenge was money. Starting a record company required significant investment for recording costs, marketing, legal fees, and artist contracts. Maria had some savings, but not nearly enough for what she wanted to do. She needed to find investors who believed in her vision of supporting authentic music instead of manufactured pop stars. That's when Maria had another brilliant idea. She decided to reveal her identity as Music Maria, but in a strategic way that would get maximum attention. She planned to announce that the mysterious music expert who had been making accurate industry predictions was actually a janitor at one of the biggest record companies in the country. Maria knew this revelation would create a huge story. Music industry magazines would want to interview her, and people would be fascinated by the idea that someone they had been ignoring possessed such valuable knowledge. The story would also expose how major record companies were wasting talent and making bad decisions. But before she revealed herself, Maria wanted to line up one more major success. She had been watching a band called Desert Rain, 4 young musicians from a small town who played a unique blend of rock and folk music. They had been rejected by every major label, including Seal Records, because their sound didn't fit into standard categories. Maria contacted Desert Rain and offered to produce their first professional album. She used most of her remaining savings to rent studio time and hire experienced producers. The band was amazed that someone believed in their music enough to invest real money in it. They worked harder than they had ever worked before, creating songs that were both musically complex and emotionally powerful. While Desert Rain was recording their album, Maria was also preparing for her big reveal. She created a detailed business plan for her own record company, which she decided to call Authentic Records. The plan showed how she would sign talented artists who had been rejected by major labels, produce high-quality recordings at reasonable costs, and use smart digital marketing to reach audiences directly. Maria also documented her track record of successful predictions and artist discoveries. She had screenshots of her early reviews that had correctly identified hit songs before they became popular. She had evidence of the artists she had helped who were now successful. Most importantly, she had proof that her approach was working, better than what the major record companies were doing. The night before her planned announcement, Maria sat in her apartment looking at everything she had built in secret. Her Music Maria accounts had grown to over 200,000 followers. The artists she had helped were thriving. Her business plan for Authentic Records was ready to present to potential investors. Tomorrow, she would stop being invisible. Tomorrow she would walk into Seal Records for the last time as their janitor and walk out as their biggest competitor. Maria smiled as she thought about the looks on their faces when they realized that the cleaning lady they had been ignoring was about to change the music industry forever. Maria woke up on the day of her big announcement feeling nervous but determined. She put on her regular cleaning uniform one last time and packed her supplies into her cart. Today would be her final day as a janitor at Seal Records, though nobody there knew it yet. She had planned everything carefully. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, she would publish a video on all her Music Maria accounts revealing her true identity. The video was already recorded and scheduled to go live automatically. In it, she explained how she had been working as a janitor while secretly becoming one of the most influential music critics online. But first, Maria wanted to do one last thing at Seal Records. She had prepared a resignation letter that was unlike anything the company had ever received. Instead of just quitting, Maria had written a detailed analysis of everything Seal Records was doing wrong, along with specific suggestions for how they could improve their business. The letter included examples of talented artists they had rejected who later became successful elsewhere. It showed how their marketing strategies were outdated and ineffective. Most importantly, it revealed how much money they were losing by ignoring the changing music industry, while someone in their own building had been predicting these changes all along. As Maria cleaned the executive offices that morning, she noticed that Blake and his team were in crisis mode again. Another one of their major artists had just announced she was leaving for a different label. The marketing director was frantically making phone calls, trying to convince her to stay, but it was too late. Seal Records was hemorrhaging talent and money. Around noon, Maria finished her cleaning duties and went to the Human Resources office. She handed in her resignation letter along with her uniform and building key. The HR manager, Mrs. Patterson, looked surprised because Maria had never caused any problems and had been a reliable employee for 8 years. "Is everything all right, Maria?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "We've always been satisfied with your work." "Yes, everything is fine," Maria replied with a small smile. "I'm starting my own business." Mrs. Patterson looked confused but accepted the resignation. She probably assumed Maria was going to clean houses or start a small cleaning service. She had no idea that Maria was about to become the founder of a record company that would compete directly with Seal Records. At exactly 2 o'clock, Maria was sitting in a coffee shop across the street from the Seal Records building when her video went live. She watched on her phone as the view count started climbing rapidly. Within minutes, people were sharing the video across all social media platforms. The video was titled, "The Janitor Who Knew More Than the Executives." In it, Maria sat in her small apartment, speaking directly to the camera in clear English. She explained how she had spent 8 years cleaning offices at Seal Records while secretly building a successful music analysis platform online. "Every day I watched executives make bad decisions about music," Maria said in the video. "They rejected talented artists and wasted money on people who couldn't really sing. But they never asked the janitor what she thought, even though the janitor was right about the music industry more often than they were. The response was immediate and explosive. Music industry professionals started commenting and sharing their own stories about being underestimated or ignored by major labels. Regular music fans were amazed that someone they had been following online was actually working as a janitor at a big record company. Within an hour, music blogs and entertainment websites were writing articles about Maria's story. The headline on Music Industry Weekly read, "The Janitor Who Predicted Hit Songs While Cleaning Executive Offices." Rolling Stone magazine called it the most shocking revelation in music business history. But the real fireworks started when people began calling Seal Records directly. Reporters wanted to interview Blake about how his company had failed to recognize the talent of someone working right under their noses. Music industry analysts were asking how Seal Records could be losing money while their janitor was successfully predicting market trends. Blake's assistant fielded dozens of calls from journalists asking for comment on the Maria Santos story. At first, Blake had no idea what they were talking about. When his staff finally showed him the viral video, his face turned red with anger and embarrassment. "This is impossible," Blake shouted. "The cleaning lady can't be some music expert. Someone is playing a joke on us." But as his team researched Maria's Music Maria accounts, they realized it wasn't a joke. The timestamps on her posts proved she had been making accurate predictions for years. Her followers were real music industry professionals and fans who trusted her opinions. Most humiliating of all, her recent artist discoveries were more successful than anything Seal Records had produced in the past 2 years. The story got even worse for Blake when reporters started asking about specific artists. How did Seal Records feel about rejecting Jake Morrison, who was now a platinum-selling artist? What about Zoe Chen, whose mental health anthem had become a cultural phenomenon? Or Desert Rain, whose debut album was climbing the charts while Seal Records' latest releases were flopping? Blake tried to control the damage by giving interviews where he claimed that Seal Records had many talented employees and that they valued input from all levels of the organization. But everyone could see through his lies. If Seal Records had valued Maria's input, why had she been working as a janitor for 8 years instead of being promoted to an executive position? The music industry loves a good underdog story, and Maria's revelation was the biggest underdog story in years. Within a week, she was being interviewed on major music podcasts and industry panels. Venture capitalists were calling her, interested in investing in her planned record company. Established musicians were reaching out wanting to work with someone who actually understood their art. But the most satisfying moment came when Maria received a phone call from Blake himself. His voice was strained and fake-friendly as he tried to convince her to come back to Seal Records as a music consultant with a substantial salary increase. "Maria, we've always recognized your potential," Blake lied smoothly. "We'd love to have you back in a position that better matches your skills. We're prepared to offer you a very competitive package." Maria listened politely, then responded in a calm voice. "Mr. Blake, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in working for a company that treated me badly for 8 years and only wants to hire me now because I'm famous. I'm starting my own record company, and we're going to compete against you." The silence on the other end of the phone was long and uncomfortable. Blake had probably never been turned down so directly by someone he considered beneath him. "You'll regret this decision," Blake finally said, his friendly tone disappearing. "The music industry is more complicated than you think. You won't last 6 months?" Maria smiled as she ended the call. Blake still didn't understand that she had been studying his industry for 8 years while he wasn't paying attention. He was about to learn exactly how much the janitor really knew about the music business. Within 2 weeks of Maria's big revelation, Authentic Records was officially registered as a business. The media attention from her story had attracted exactly the kind of investors she needed. People who understood that the music industry was changing and wanted to support someone with a proven track record of identifying talent. Her first major investor was David Kim, a tech entrepreneur who had sold his startup for $50 million and was looking for interesting new projects. David had been following Music Maria's predictions for months without knowing her real identity. When he learned the story behind her success, he immediately offered to provide the startup funding for Authentic Records. "I've seen a lot of business plans," David told Maria during their first meeting, "but I've never seen someone with your combination of industry knowledge, proven results, and personal motivation. You don't just want to make money. You want to change how the music business works." With proper funding secured, Maria was able to rent office space, hire staff, and begin operating as a real record company. She chose a small building just 3 blocks away from Seal Records, partly because the location was convenient and partly because she enjoyed the symbolism of being so close to her former workplace. Maria's first official signing was Desert Rain, the band she had been supporting, while still working as a janitor. Their debut album, Small Town Dreams, was released just 6 weeks after Authentic Records opened its doors. The album was everything that Seal Records' recent releases were not: authentic, emotional, and musically sophisticated. The marketing campaign for Desert Rain was completely different from traditional record company promotions. Instead of trying to get radio play and magazine coverage, Maria focused on digital platforms and direct fan engagement. She used her social media influence to create buzz, but she also encouraged the band members to tell their own stories about growing up in a small town and struggling to make their music heard. The strategy worked perfectly. Small Town Dreams sold more copies in its first month than most of Seal Records' recent albums had sold in their entire release cycles. Music critics praised the album's authenticity, and fans connected deeply with the band's honest lyrics and innovative sound. But Maria wasn't content with just one successful album. She had identified several other talented artists who had been rejected by major labels, and she wanted to prove that her success wasn't just luck. Her second signing was Carmen Rodriguez, a bilingual singer-songwriter whose music blended English and Spanish lyrics with Latin and pop influences. Seal Records had rejected Carmen because they said there wasn't a market for bilingual music. Maria knew this was completely wrong. She had been watching demographic trends and social media engagement, and she could see that audiences were hungry for music that reflected America's diverse cultural reality. Carmen's first single, Two Worlds, became a massive hit that crossed multiple demographic lines. Young Latinos felt represented and proud, while English-speaking audiences enjoyed the beautiful melodies and universal themes about belonging to multiple cultures. The song reached #1 on several charts and was featured in major TV shows and commercials. Meanwhile, Seal Records was struggling more than ever. The negative publicity from Maria's story had damaged their reputation with both artists and industry partners. Several musicians had publicly canceled their contracts, saying they didn't want to work with a company that had treated talent so poorly. Radio stations and streaming services were giving less priority to Seal Records releases. Blake tried various strategies to fight back. He hired expensive consultants to redesign their talent scouting process. He launched a publicity campaign emphasizing Seal Records' commitment to discovering new voices. He even tried to poach some of Maria's artists by offering them larger contracts and bigger marketing budgets. But none of these strategies worked. The artists who had signed with Authentic Records were happy with their treatment there. Maria gave them creative control over their music, fair contract terms, and personal attention to their career development. Most importantly, she actually understood their artistic vision instead of trying to force them into generic commercial formulas. The music industry was taking notice of Authentic Records' unusual success. Trade magazines wrote articles analyzing Maria's business model and predicting that other entrepreneurs would copy her approach. Established record companies began hiring cultural consultants and authenticity experts, trying to replicate what Maria was doing naturally. But Maria had advantages that couldn't be easily copied. Her 8 years of observing Seal Records from the inside had taught her exactly what not to do. She knew which industry practices were wasteful, which marketing strategies were outdated, and which kinds of contracts unfairly exploited artists. More importantly, Maria understood something that many music executives had forgotten. The business was supposed to be about music, not just about money. She genuinely cared about helping talented people share their art with the world. This authentic passion came through in everything Authentic Records did, from their artist contracts to their marketing campaigns. 6 months after opening, Authentic Records had signed 12 artists and released 8 successful albums. Their total revenue was still small compared to major labels, but their profit margins were much higher because they weren't wasting money on ineffective strategies. Every dollar spent had a clear purpose and measurable results. The success wasn't lost on Seal Records' board of directors. Blake's company was now losing money every quarter while a startup run by their former janitor was growing rapidly. Board members were asking uncomfortable questions about Blake's leadership and strategic vision. The final blow came when Desert Rain won a Grammy Award for Best New Artist. During their acceptance speech, the lead singer thanked Maria specifically, telling the international television audience about how she had believed in their music when no one else would. Maria Santos saw something special in us when we were just 4 kids with guitars and big dreams, he said from the stage. She didn't care that we didn't look like typical pop stars or sound like what was on the radio. She cared about our music, and she helped us share it with all of you. Thank you, Maria, for proving that authenticity always wins in the end. The Grammy victory was covered extensively in music magazines and entertainment news shows. Every article mentioned the story of how Desert Rain had been discovered by a janitor turned record executive who had built her company from the ground up. That night, as Maria watched the Grammy ceremony from her small apartment, she felt a satisfaction deeper than any she had experienced in years. She had proven that talent could be recognized by anyone who truly cared about music. She had shown that treating people with respect and believing in their dreams could build something more valuable than the biggest corporate budget. But Maria also knew this was just the beginning. Seal Records was still a huge company with significant resources, and Blake wasn't going to give up easily. The real test of Authentic Records would come when the major labels started fighting back seriously, using their industry connections and financial power to try to destroy her growing business. 1 year after Maria had walked out of Seal Records as a janitor, she walked back into the building as the CEO of their biggest competitor. This time, she wasn't carrying a cleaning cart. She was carrying a briefcase full of contracts to buy Seal Records' most valuable assets. The situation had escalated dramatically over the past few months. Blake's desperate attempts to save his company had only made things worse. He had signed several expensive artists who demanded huge upfront payments, but failed to produce successful music. He had spent millions on marketing campaigns that generated no sales. Most damaging of all, he had tried to sue Authentic Records for stealing trade secrets, claiming that Maria had used confidential information from her time as a janitor. The lawsuit backfired spectacularly. Maria's lawyers easily proved that all her business strategies were based on publicly available information and her own observations. More embarrassingly for Blake, the legal discovery process revealed internal Seal Records documents that showed how poorly the company had been managed. Emails between executives mocking artists and employees were leaked to music industry publications, causing even more damage to their reputation. Meanwhile, Authentic Records had grown from a startup to a major player in the music industry. Maria had signed 25 artists, and 15 of them had achieved platinum sales status. Her company's revenue was approaching $50 million per year, with profit margins that made traditional record companies jealous. The breakthrough moment came when Taylor Swift's management team approached Maria about a potential collaboration. Swift was looking for a label that would give her complete creative control and fair contract terms for her next album. After meeting with Maria and seeing how Authentic Records treated their artists, Swift decided to sign with them for a special project. The announcement that Taylor Swift was working with Authentic Records sent shockwaves through the music industry. If one of the world's biggest stars was choosing Maria's small company over established major labels, it proved that the industry landscape had fundamentally changed. Blake's board of directors had finally had enough. Seal Records' stock price had fallen by 60%. They were losing money every quarter, and their most talented employees were quitting to join smaller, more innovative companies like Authentic Records. The board called an emergency meeting and voted to remove Blake as CEO. They also decided that Seal Records needed to either find a buyer or declare bankruptcy within the next 6 months. The company that had once seemed untouchable was now desperate to survive. When Maria heard that Seal Records was for sale, she saw an opportunity that went beyond simple revenge. Seal Records still owned the rights to thousands of classic songs from the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. These music catalogs were incredibly valuable, especially in the digital streaming era, where old songs could generate income for decades. Maria had learned about these music rights during her years as a janitor, when she had seen contracts and financial reports lying on executives' desks. She knew that Seal Records had been underutilizing these assets, failing to properly license them for movies, commercials, and streaming platforms. Working with her investors, Maria put together an offer to buy Seal Records' entire music catalog and several of their recording studios. She wasn't interested in buying the company's debts or keeping their current management, but she wanted the valuable assets that could help Authentic Records expand into new areas of the music business. The negotiation took 3 months, but eventually Seal Records' board accepted Maria's offer. For $42 million, Authentic Records acquired one of the largest collections of classic American music, along with state-of-the-art recording facilities and distribution networks. The day the sale was finalized, Maria held a press conference in the same conference room, where she had once cleaned windows and emptied trash cans. Music industry reporters filled the room, eager to hear from the woman who had gone from janitor to music mogul in just 18 months. 8 years ago, I started working in this building as a cleaning lady, Maria told the assembled reporters. People here treated me like I was invisible, like my opinions didn't matter. But I was watching, I was learning, and I was planning. Today, I'm proud to announce that Authentic Records now owns this building and will use it to support artists who create real, meaningful music. A reporter asked Maria what she planned to do with Blake, who was still technically employed by Seal Records until the transition was complete. Maria smiled and gave an answer that became legendary in music industry circles. Mr. Blake will have the opportunity to apply for a position at our company, just like anyone else. If he's qualified, and if he can demonstrate that he understands our values of respecting artists and treating employees fairly, then maybe we'll consider him. But I think he might be more comfortable looking for work somewhere else. Blake never applied for a job at Authentic Records. Instead, he left the music industry entirely and moved to a different city. Some people said he started working in real estate. Others heard he went back to school. Maria never tried to find out what happened to him. She was too busy building something positive to waste time thinking about the past. The acquisition of Seal Records assets allowed Authentic Records to expand rapidly. Maria used the classic music catalog to create new revenue streams, licensing old songs for modern movies and TV shows. She renovated the recording studios with the latest technology and rented them to independent artists at affordable rates. Most importantly, Maria established the Authentic Records Foundation, a nonprofit organization that provided scholarships and recording opportunities for young musicians from low-income backgrounds. She remembered what it felt like to have dreams, but lacked the resources to pursue them. And she wanted to make sure other talented people didn't face the same barriers she had encountered. 5 years after leaving her job as a janitor, Maria Santos was featured on the cover of Billboard magazine as Music Executive of the Year. The article described how she had revolutionized the record industry by focusing on artistic authenticity rather than manufactured celebrity. Authentic Records was now valued at over $200 million, with offices in Los Angeles, Nashville, and New York. The company represented more than 100 artists across multiple genres, and their albums consistently topped the charts while receiving critical acclaim for their artistic integrity. But perhaps Maria's greatest satisfaction came from the letters and emails she received from young people who said her story had inspired them to pursue their own dreams despite obstacles and doubts. She had proven that background doesn't determine destiny, that being underestimated can be an advantage, and that sometimes the most valuable insights come from the people others choose to ignore. In her office at Authentic Records, the same office that had once belonged to Blake, Maria kept a small framed photo of herself in her old cleaning uniform. It reminded her every day that success isn't about where you start. It's about how much you're willing to learn, work, and believe in yourself even when nobody else does. The music industry would never be the same, and it was all because a janitor decided to stop being invisible and start being heard.